Welcome to the Money Minus Shame podcast powered by the Financial Therapy Clinical Institute, where we make money human. Here, we eliminate shame from the financial experience and drive money conversations to be holistic and human first. I'm your host, Nate Astle, and welcome to Money Minus Shame. Welcome to the Money Minus Shame podcast powered by the Financial Therapy Clinical Institute. I am your host, Nathan Astle, and I am joined here with Tyrone White, our COO of the Financial Therapy Clinical Institute. Tyrone, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about financial trauma. Yeah, such a great topic.
It is a good topic.
Yeah.
Why is this a great topic? What do you think?
I think it's a great topic because many people haven't heard of it before, and it's even growing in our space. The topic is starting to be discussed more and more, and I think it probably affects more people. And some people, everyday people, think it's like maybe just like a gimmick or something that is just made up. So I think it's a good topic to talk about, and I love talking about it because I think it affects many of us and we don't realize it.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is way more widespread, way more common than we realize, and certainly way more common than what we talk about. So, when I talk about financial trauma with people, a lot of times I had to start with, what do you think trauma is? A lot of times people think trauma is big bad events that hurt us in some way, which is true, right? It's the car crashes, it's the battles, it's the singular events that really affect us. But trauma is more than that. Trauma is also buildup of smaller events over time. Trauma can be neglect. Trauma can be consistently being invalidated. Trauma can be seeing my parents fight all the time and internalizing as my fault. Trauma really isn't just something we narrow down to specific life circumstances and other life circumstances. We just say, no, that's not trauma, and I'm not allowed to have trauma responses from that. Trauma really can be anything. The difference, though, between a trauma and a stressor is the stressor is something that we can cope with, we can handle because we have the resources for it. I can go through a really hard thing, but if I have family and friends to support me, if I have like a very solid sense of self, if I have therapy, if I have money, if I have certain things like that, that can help our ability to cope with the stressor. And then we don't have the same outcomes as someone who went through that same stressor but didn't have those resources. They're going to have a totally different response, which is where our trauma responses come in. So trauma is not just the bad thing that happens. It's also how our body responds and reacts to it. Like it's not just the event, it's the outcome as well.
We talked a little bit about financial shame. How does that differ from financial trauma? Is there a difference there? Because you might hear them both talked about a lot, and I think there might be some confusion about the two.
Yeah, well, financial shame is a feeling, right? It's something that we can experience. But traumatic events can cause us to have financial shame. If I grew up and my parents fought about money all the time and I felt like it was my fault, or maybe they told me it was my fault, that's a traumatic experience, which then leads me to have shame. It makes me feel like I'm not worthy, I'm a bad person, I'm bad with money, I'm a burden, something like that. Financial trauma is really any of those events. It doesn't even have to be a money event to have financial trauma impacts. Like it can be my dad going to work every day, or my dad making comments about the unhoused person on the street corner. Like those things over and over again develop into what we call our money scripts or our money beliefs. But a lot of these money beliefs come with a lot of pain. So something I think that's really important to talk about with financial trauma is, what does it look like? Because if I'm expecting trauma to only show up in a certain way, like, oh, well, you're going to have PTSD symptoms. PTSD symptoms are pretty widespread. Like there's a lot of things that could be PTSD. So here's a couple examples of what financial trauma can look like. One is inappropriate sense of guilt or shame. That's actually a very common response to trauma. Notice I use the words inappropriate. We all make mistakes. We all may have feelings where we screw up and we feel like crap about ourselves. Although that's somewhat of a common experience, if it leaves us feeling like there's something inherently wrong with us, that's probably financial shame. But also if kind of objectively we know the way I'm treating myself isn't fair. If that guilt or I'm taking the burden on, or I'm taking responsibility for other people's actions, that might be a sign of financial trauma. It's when our guilt or our shame it's misplaced. We're saying, oh my gosh, it's all my fault. But we're also not seeing the fact that other people or other systems contributed to the breakdown of what happened. What I see very often with this is a client will show up and they'll say, I'm such a screw up. I make all these money mistakes and such an idiot. And then we talk a little bit more about their story, and they never got any financial education growing up. They were very unsupported when it comes to their own relationship with money. And we talk about all these different factors that contribute to their breakdown. It's never just them. It's not that simple. But if we can't see, if we're taking the guilt on and it's not fair, that might be a trauma symptom. Some other trauma symptoms include when our feelings don't match the data in front of us. So if I feel anxious about my money and I feel that anxiety at like a 10 out of 10, but when I actually look at the numbers, or I have a professional or someone or a friend even looking at the numbers with me, and we're like, actually, this is pretty okay. Like, yeah, there might be some changes we need to make, but like, we're okay. If the data says that I'm only at a 2, I only need to be worried at a 2, but I'm feeling it at a 10, there might be some trauma there. Other kind of behavioral things you might see, avoidance. Avoidance is a very common trauma response. It goes back to our fight and flight responses. It's a way for us to emotionally flee. Right? I just avoid. I don't like. There's so many ways that financial trauma can show up, but it's something that is very broad. That also means it affects a ton of people. It's not just the person that grows up in poverty or loses their job or has a major medical expense. Those are examples of financial trauma, but it can also be much more subtle than that as well.
Yeah, I like we were talking earlier how sometimes when I'm working with clients, they'll have a good amount of savings, but they still feel stressed about money. Everything's good, but they definitely have strong feelings and worry about money. And I guess that would be something that you could probably look for symptoms and say, hey, maybe there is some financial trauma there. Because sometimes like the numbers are just not matching up to the feelings around money. So I like when you talked about that because it's something I deal with on a regular. So let's say if somebody think they have these symptoms of financial trauma that you discussed. What kind of help would they receive from you if they went to a financial therapist in general? What type of help would they receive? What does that kind of look like?
I think it really comes down to one, can we identify where the trauma is coming from? I do think it helps a lot knowing, like, why do I have the feelings that I do? Because otherwise, what we're left with is, I guess there's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm screwy. I'm just stupid or bad with money. And if we can identify where's this coming from, we have a much better chance of what do we do with it. So a financial therapist would hopefully help with identifying, helping explore the person's past, helping them explore what were the messages or experiences or feelings that have stuck around with money. What I like to do is something called a money timeline. If you go to the Financial Therapy Clinical Institute's website and you go into the resource library, there's a worksheet that you can do on your own about what your money timeline is. But really just exploring what are some of the major moments and some of the memories that people have around money. That's going to be helpful. And of course, the other thing is, how do I cope with and regulate my feelings when these traumatic memories or these traumatic feelings come up? So it can be some basic mindfulness grounding skills. Don't knock it till you try it. Honestly, like, grounding is a very useful tool to have in your tool belt of, okay, a bill just came in. I'm noticing my anxiety shoot up. I'm going to make sure that I take some deep breaths. I'm going to make sure that I check in with my senses. One of my favorite activities is, it's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but it's just, all right, name 5 things you see, 4 colors you see, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell or taste, and 1 thing you can touch. If you just do that activity right when you get that bill in the mail, it's not like it's a magic pill that's going to make all your bad feelings go away, but it probably is going to be enough to distract you and get you off that kind of train that's spiraling. Just to step back, say, hang on, am I safe right now? This letter, even if I read it and it's scary and it's uncomfortable, the letter isn't going to hurt me. It's not like the Howler from Harry Potter where it's barking at me. Like, the more that we can remember, money has very large impacts in our lives, but it isn't inherently dangerous. That's something that our trauma teaches us, is that this thing will hurt me. Our amygdala going crazy saying, oh my gosh, danger, danger, warning, warning. If we can step back and ground ourselves a little bit, we're going to be better able to actually respond to our money situations and our money decisions in a much more balanced way. Giving some coping skills, exploring the past, and of course, processing. That means telling the stories, talking about what happened, talking about how do we wish things could be different, talking about and moving through kind of some of our body experiences. You may have heard of like somatic processing. Somatic just means body. Another kind of tool or activity I do with clients is I will have them talk about the feeling that they have in their body when they're feeling stressed or anxious or depressed or shame. I'll have them touch that part of their body with their hand. And then what I ask them to do is I want you to touch that part of your body. It's usually in the chest or the throat area. Is I just want you to just give it little taps, and I want you to take some breaths, and I want you to try and reassure that part of your body that you're safe, that you're okay, that you're working through what you need to work through, that money is something you can do. Even just that kind of experience can really help people move through the parts of their past and maybe even parts of their present that are making them feel stuck.
That's very helpful tips. And I know some of the techniques that you recommend are on the website as worksheets as well, like the 5 4 3 1 technique. I want to ask you, I tried the timeline. We're going back to the timeline. I tried the timeline myself, and I realized is that a lot of my beliefs or trauma, a lot of my events happened when I was younger.
Mhm.
And sometimes a lot of the stuff that happened when I was older, it has a lot of correlation with stuff that happened when I was younger. Do you see that a lot with people, or is it like a mixture of like things that happen when they're adults and younger? What do you kind of see?
Our basic beliefs and how we view the world comes from our early childhood experiences. That includes how we view relationships, how we view people in general, how we view ourselves, and yes, even how we view money. There's actually been some research that our basic financial beliefs and financial schemas is the word, but those are pretty much solidified by the age of 7. Yeah,
Oh
it's
wow.
one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting because most
Yeah.
of us aren't making huge financial decisions at 7, but our
Mhm.
beliefs about money have already been implanted and is part of how we think. Of course, there are people that may have pretty normal, maybe resourceful childhood, like things are going well, and then they have some traumatic experiences as adults, and it can still bring up a lot of trauma responses. But a lot of times, the meaning making or like how the person processes that traumatic event or traumatic events comes from the way that they were taught to experience life as a kid. Something a lot of people may have heard about is it's called attachment theory. Attachment theory is just basically the idea that as children we get blueprints of how we can operate in the world. So when we cry as babies and our parent comes and nurtures us and soothes us, over time we learn I can get my needs met. This is a belief that I hold, and I hold it very deeply. It's early experiences versus a child who cries and their parent didn't come or didn't come consistently. I'm learning that the world isn't safe and I can't get my needs met, even if I cry. These types of early experiences inform the way that we view other people. It informs the way that we view ourselves. Am I a burden or not? If I bring up an issue, is it worthy of being heard? Do I get in the practice of validating or invalidating myself and my perspective? All of that stuff has to do with money. When I'm talking to my partner about money, do I feel like I can acknowledge and validate myself enough so that I'm not seeking validation from my partner all the time? When I'm making financial choices, do I feel like generally I can be safe? Do I feel generally that I have what we call self-efficacy, which is just that feeling that I can do things, like I have power or I have control? When I'm making money choices, do I feel like generally I make good choices? I can trust myself. That's a powerful emotional state to be in when we're making financial choices. So that's why, talking about financial trauma isn't just talking about the bad things that happen. It's about what meaning did we make from it? What does this bad thing, what does it mean? Does your brain or you, how do you interpret this meaning making experience? And now, are there other ways that we can interpret it? Are there other messages, other narratives that we can pull from this experience that says, actually, that is a bad thing that happened to me, but I'm not bad. I didn't get my needs met when I was a kid, but I can get my needs met now. Now we can rewrite some of these traumatic stories to be something different, something more healing.
You talked about a lot about choices and making decisions, and then earlier I remember you mentioning money scripts and how
Mhm.
those could develop and making choices. Do a lot of money scripts, are all money scripts good, or are there good and bad money scripts? And do you kind of develop those money scripts when you're younger, and those help you make your decisions? Could that lead to like financial traumas, creating bad money scripts and then making bad choices later?
Yeah, money scripts are just our beliefs that we have around money. And I think labeling something as good or bad tends to be less helpful. But certainly our beliefs around money impact the things that we do. So if I grow up and whether through my parents or through society, I've heard over and over that rich people are greedy and rich people are bad. And then I go out into the workforce 20 years later and I am making a lot of money, or maybe I'm not. The belief is that if I start making money and if I start getting wealth, I must be bad. I must be greedy. It's not something that's always conscious either. These aren't like explicit things that we tell ourselves. It's more like a subtle message that kind of seeps into our consciousness. So some examples of money scripts might be, rich people are greedy or bad. You can't be wealthy and be a good person. Other examples might be money will solve all my problems. Money will make me okay, make me safe. Some others might be my self-worth is equal to my net worth. If I'm doing well financially, then I'm a good person. Others might be money will make me safe. And if I have money, then I won't be having difficulties anymore. All of these beliefs aren't inherently true or untrue. That's not the point. The point is, if I know what they are, how does it impact my actual financial decision making? What does it make me do differently when it comes to my money? Does it change the way I negotiate my salary at work? Does it change the way that I budget or not budget? All of these things can be really impactful with our later experiences. And if we have traumatic events that are supporting some of these financial scripts or these money scripts or money beliefs, it can really kind of screw with some of our later decision making.
Do you have any examples of you working with clients or anything that kind of sticks out to you that you want to kind of share that kind of helps the people watching see that they may have financial trauma themselves?
Yeah, so one of the things that I like to do with the money timeline specifically is asking people just go through different parts of their lives, elementary, middle, high school, early 20s, infancy, going through different time periods and try and recall any money memories that you have, but any money memories that have emotional weight. Okay. So I had a client recently that did this activity, and our first session, she told me, I grew up fine. Like I wasn't wanting for anything. Like I was like solidly middle class. I felt like I got what I needed. And then we start doing the money timeline activity. And she would talk about how her mom would always say how stressed she was. And her dad would make little comments about how they couldn't afford the things that he wanted because that they had kids. Now, these situations aren't necessarily tied to income per se, but they did drastically impact the way that my client viewed herself. As we kept exploring, we would talk about how much anxiety she felt when she thought about money stuff, how much she felt like a burden whenever she made a money mistake. That is something that is extremely common. So if people notice, hey, I've got a lot of anxiety around money, and maybe I'm able to tie it to some specific event, there might be some trauma there. There might be like a reason why this is something that I'm experiencing. If I notice that, I'm going to use this word I don't love using, but I'm irrationally troubled by something, like I know that things are okay, or I can see the numbers on the page and recognize that my feeling doesn't match. There might be some trauma there. If you're noticing that you are avoiding certain money topics, or on the other end of the spectrum, you're hyper vigilant. If you overspend in a budget area of $20, you're going through a 10 out of 10, panic or anxiety or depression. There's probably something there that's telling you money isn't safe or I'm not okay. I think that kind of exploration can be really helpful. When I'm talking about getting your needs met, it's much more than just your physical needs. Do I have food and water and shelter? Humans have a lot of needs, including emotional needs. It can look like, do I get enough physical touch? Do I get enough validation? Do enough people support me? Do enough people hear me, see me? All of those things aren't just nice to haves. They are literally required for our survival. And if you think about like babies, for example, when babies aren't nurtured, they pass away. It's not just about the physical needs. There's a reason the babies need to get held. When you think about evolutionarily, being connected with the group literally meant our survival. And so when we're talking about getting our needs met, it's understandable if you're like, well, I had my basic human needs met. How come I'm still struggling, or I don't understand how this connects? It's important to know that you have a lot more needs than just those basics. One starting point is emotional needs. Every human needs to have connection with other humans. It's a very important part of how we thrive as humans. Connection can look a lot of different ways. Maybe some of us are more introverted, maybe some of us are more extroverted. It doesn't really matter that stuff as much as just knowing I have people that care about me and I have people that I care about. And we check in on each other. We ask each other how we're doing and we talk about what's going well. We talk about what we need support in. That is a universal human need. That kind of emotional nurturing has huge impacts on how we feel in our day to day. How we feel in our day to day has huge impacts on our financial behaviors. And the other thing is when it comes to money, if we're talking specifically about financial needs, something that I think is a myth is that we have our needs and we have our wants. And these are very obvious two separate categories, but they're not. Humans need wants. In other words, it is not only nice and important, but necessary for us to have things that we look forward to when it comes to our money. It can be spending, it can be saving. It doesn't really matter. The point, though, is that our wants, the things that are little splurges or those kinds of things, are very crucial to our long-standing financial well-being. It's kind of like going on a diet. Many of you know, like, if I just restrict and restrict and restrict, most diets are not sustainable that way because our willpower isn't a limitless resource. We need to have methods where we get wants met, not just our needs. It doesn't mean that we can go crazy with it, right? But that doesn't mean that we have to cut out all joy from our financial spending just because it's not a need. Like, that isn't how it works. We have to find the right balance so that our needs are met and our want needs are met. And just allow yourself to have needs. Just start there. Say, okay, maybe this is a need, maybe it's not, but for now, I'm going to say this is probably at least something important if I'm having this reaction to it.
That's something that really changed when I started working here at Footsie is when you work at other places, they definitely like, hey, that's not a need. You don't need it. Cut out the budget. And then when I started working here at Footsie, I started realizing that it was definitely better to have some wants, especially prioritizing the wants that the client really enjoys to make the budget or the spending plan that we're creating sustainable. I agree with you 100% on that. I definitely see more success now that we incorporate the wants in there at some type of level. Maybe not what they had before, but it's something that they're able to do long term to make the spending plan sustainable for the long term. So definitely hit home for me and something that I definitely incorporate now in everything that I do when I do my sessions and helping people. So if somebody feels that they have financial trauma and they're trying to figure out how to get help, how would they get that? How would they get help from someone? What should they do?
Ideally, you should try and find a financial therapist that can work with you because financial therapists have specific training on how do we heal and process financial traumas. Now, financial therapists is a term that there's some financial planners and financial coaches that have that title. Just make sure that whoever you do end up going to is someone that is credentialed and knows about financial trauma and has the tools and the skill set to work with it. Your normal mental health therapist also may be able to help with certain aspects of financial trauma, especially if it's tied to specific events that you can identify. A lot of financial trauma is symbolic more than anything. I think in our discussion about needs versus wants, the wants represent a symbolic, I'm able to take care of myself and I care about myself enough to take care of my wants and my needs. A lot of money decisions is like that. And so even if you are just going to a normal mental health therapist that doesn't have the financial therapist background, they still can help you with some of the symbolism behind money. If you can get the professional support, it's important. Don't skip out on that. Other things, though, that help with financial trauma, one, your own personal exploration. So this is where things like doing your own money timeline or doing other free resource stuff that you might get from a therapist's office. Another huge piece of trauma healing is connecting with community. Healing happens in relationships. So it can be family, friends, even, support groups online. There are lots of ways that we can remember the issues that I'm having are not unique to me. There are a lot of people who are experiencing or have experienced this very same thing. And what that means is there's a lot of reasons that I can be hopeful that things can change. A lot of people have healed and a lot of people have struggled. But regardless, I'm not alone. That connection with community can be a really, really important and impactful thing. So there's not a whole lot of really safe places around money because unfortunately money is, as you know, it's very taboo. It's something that we don't talk about, which leads to shame, which is the whole point of this podcast. But, finding ways that we can connect with other people can be a really healing thing and helping us remember, oh, I'm not as alone as I might feel.
The information you get today, I think it's going to help a lot of people. Thank you for sharing a lot of the information techniques. I know we're just scratching the surface on a lot of topics we went over today.
It really is just a very general overview. All this has a lot more depth. And so please make sure that you are tuned in to our next episode. This has been the Money Minus Shame podcast, where we take the shame out of money. Thank you so much for listening, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you are first to know when we upload a new episode. See y'all soon. Thanks for listening to the Money Minus Shame podcast, powered by the Financial Therapy Clinical Institute. This podcast is not meant to be a substitute for mental health services or financial advice. This is a cafeteria where you can take what you like and leave the rest. Make sure to like and subscribe so you're the first to know when new episodes drop. And if you like what you hear, let us know. Reach out at money-shame@gmail.com or send us a DM with thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like to see us cover. Take care of yourself out there, and we'll see you next time.